American Spartans. Lieutenant General William B. Caldwell, U.S. Army, retired. Preface. Immediately after he completed jump school in August 1944, my father volunteered to serve as an instructor at the Airborne Demolitions School. After graduating from Officer Candidate School as an infantry second lieutenant, he was assigned to the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment following the surrender of Germany. He was subsequently assigned to the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division, which had returned to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He would go on to serve as counterintelligence officer during the Korean War and remained in the Army Reserve, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. I have vivid memories of his paratroop jump boots and the silver jump and glider wings on his uniform that signified his being part of the paratrooper community. My idea of trying to chronicle the role the 82nd would play in the war on terrorism seemed to be a natural extension of his story and those of paratroopers who deserved to have their stories told. In 2003, I began to pursue telling the story of the 82nd's deployment to Afghanistan and Iraq. At the time, no one could have known that this two-theater war would become such a long-term commitment of troops and treasure. As someone who had never pursued or researched such an endeavor, I had no idea that the writing process would take such an enormous amount of time. Interviewing paratroopers from each deployment meant spending hours contacting them, lining up, conducting and recording interviews. The vast majority of those interviews were conducted by phone. Often follow-up interviews were conducted, and I always requested photos to provide me with a visual of what the interviewees had experienced. Transcribing the interviews was a key part of beginning the writing process. I found it easier to read hard copy in order to find common threads. In turn, this approach allowed me the ability to mirror the timeline I followed, based on the narrative from the unit citation that had been submitted for award consideration. Crafting a piece of work for a potentially diverse audience and the framing of a cohesive, intriguing account that would inform listeners of the sacrifices and bravery exhibited by these paratroopers was always my goal. I continued to interview members of the 82nd through November 2007, when I spoke with Colonel Brian Owens, then commander of the 3rd Brigade, which had recently returned from Iraq. At the end of the interview, I asked if he would recommend another person to interview. "Have you spoken to Drew Poppas?" Owens indicated that Poppas had quite a story to share. When I got off the phone with Drew, I knew that this was the story that I would focus on. The 15-month deployment of the 5th Squadron, 73rd Cavalry Regiment, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 505th Airborne Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division to Iraq would become my writing commitment to these paratroopers and their families. Military members who serve in combat are in constant danger of being injured, wounded, or killed. Losing a team member is traumatic, but continuing the mission is essential. Add to that the stresses of family separation, being exposed to a foreign culture that most find unfamiliar, and the sectarian violence that was such a large part of the fight. They would live and work in austere conditions, conducting patrols and missions out of combat outposts that were established to help protect the local populations from the violence perpetrated by Al-Qaeda and other terrorist cells. This story is a microcosm of what many of our military members have experienced in both the past and the present. Although the nature of warfare has changed to some extent, what service members experience in combat has not. The camaraderie, danger, and stress that is part of war fighting appears to be the essence of what service members relate to in whichever era they serve. During the 15 months that 573 CAV was deployed, 22 members of the squadron were killed. In this same period of time, service members from other units were wounded or killed by enemy fire, including paratroopers from the 3rd Brigade of the 82nd who were also fighting insurgents. They faced similar dangers and also made every effort to accomplish their mission. I interviewed